Yeah, you can cut out that erroneous comment on the end. That was not very funny, was it? Before we get going into the main topics of today, we have a little bit of follow-up, very, very late follow-up, actually. Avid listener Cigar pointed out that we were factually erroneous in episode 4, where we watched the video of the robot sumo.
Ah.
He said that generally Station13 is pretty on point when it comes to being factually correct. However, he was shocked because during episode 4, when we discussed Robert Sumo, who's a very nice guy, and Robert Sumo enjoys actually creating robots that fight each other inside a ring, trying to push each other out of the ring. He said that we were so far off base that he was aghast. He was shocked that we could be so wrong. Basically, according to Cigar, he actually, I guess in his formative years, took part in this actual specific tech sport.
Oh, okay.
And he pointed out that they are actually controlled by artificial intelligence.
Ah, there you go. See, I thought they were. That's not us being wrong. That's you being wrong. I take issue with Cigar's comment.
Yes, he said that another thing that I said that was wrong. I take responsibility. Another thing that I said that was wrong was, you may remember that one of those robots had flaps that came out of the side.
Yes, and I was wondering what the reasoning behind that was.
Let's see if you can get it. What do you now think that those flaps are for? If you want to take a second try.
I don't know. I'm trying to remember what you said. Did you say it was for the greater surface area to prevent them from being flipped over or something? Was that?
I'm going to own up completely to what I said, which was highly wrong according to Cigar. But I said that yes, it was. If the idea is to flip the other robot over, then I would imagine that having these flaps that come out the side would help it stabilize, or at least make it harder to flip it over because there's more of it to turn over, basically.
Right.
That is very wrong, apparently.
So what are they for? Are they to push the other robot to have more of an area that they can push with?
Now, bear in mind that this conversation with Cigar was had over about 30 seconds. I'm probably going to get this wrong a second time, but anyway, I'm going to go for it anyway. I believe he said that actually those flaps are to confuse the AI of the opponent.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. That obviously is a theory that we would only have been able to come up with had we been more certain of the fact that it is AI in the first place.
I'm sure Cigar is probably flipping his table over right now as he's listening, because I may have gotten it wrong a second time there, but I think that's what he said.
That does sound like, I don't know, there may be multiple reasons. There probably are, sort of. I imagine that changes a number of variables, having those flaps, and some of them would be physical. But we did talk briefly when we were talking about the possibility that they were AI. We did talk about how the machine vision aspect of that AI, identifying the other robot and working out, what its physical properties would be and what would be the best tactic in order to flip it over and all of that side of things, would be one of the difficult challenges.
Right.
So it makes sense that having the robot be able to kind of artificially give itself a different shape would definitely confuse the AI and make it either just flip out and do totally the wrong thing, or if it's a particularly good AI, choose the wrong strategy out of a number of strategies that it has available to it. I don't know how sophisticated these AIs are, but you can imagine that they might know the sorts of robots they're likely to come up against and pick their strategies to fit their opponent.
Right.
So it's very interesting. I would be fascinated to hear more from Cigar about all this. Do you know where he did it? Did he do it in Japan?
I don't know.
Feel free, Cigar, to respond further. I'm fascinated to hear more.
I apologize for being way off base, as he put it.
Way off base. That does seem a bit harsh. I mean, the thing that he's criticizing you for is being wrong about a thing of which there are only something completely binary. You are either 100% correct or you are way off base.
Right. I was indeed way off base, but that's okay. That's okay. We live and we learn.
That is indeed. And speaking of learning, firstly, this is quite an interesting episode of the podcast because we're actually coming to you from the future, or from way in the past, depending on how you look at it. But we're recording this podcast quite a way in advance because I'm going to be away in England for the next couple of weeks. And so we did the last episode of the podcast, which listeners will have heard 2 weeks ago, at the time of recording, has not actually yet been released. And this episode won't be released now for, 3 weeks or something?
Yeah, that's about right.
So everything we're saying may or may not be totally stale by the time you all hear this.
Can I just interject a very interesting astronomical point at that juncture there?
Certainly.
This is completely irrelevant, but I just sort of thought of it, the idea of looking or listening into the past, as it were, in this case. Have you ever stopped and looked up at the night sky and actually thought to yourself that you are looking into the past when you see the stars?
Funnily enough, yes, I do think that quite. It's looking not just into the past, but way, way into the past.
That is utterly amazing. I mean, when you think about it, it makes total sense. And it doesn't, like even my 7-year-old son, he can understand the fact that the distances are so massive that even light, which we take for granted as being, instantaneous, because we see things happening as they happen,
right?
Within our microscopic scale on the ruler of universal measurements. Even these stars are so far away that it takes the light that long to come to us. That the way I explained it to my son is that if he was on a planet around one of those stars up in the night sky, and he waved at me, it would take me, I don't even know, what is it, like millions of years. Which means that if a planet up there just happened to explode, or a star suddenly decided to turn its color from, yellow to, shocking pink or something, or beige, or puce or something, I don't know, some creative color like that.
Well, colors also complicate the issue because, of course, they get warped.
Just hold on. Yeah, that's a bit too much of a concept for my peanut brain. But just the idea that would take so many millions of years for you to actually see that, which means that what we're seeing right now when we look up into the night sky is millions of years ago. And that is it's utterly beautiful, that concept, really.
It is.
I mean, it's just so puzzling, but so simple. The idea, it's not difficult to understand how that comes about. But then, just something that you take for granted, which is the night sky and the stars up there, when you think about it as being that long ago, it really, I don't know, it just sort of, it's this magical feeling, isn't it?
It is interesting. It's funny because it's at once kind of amazing and mystical and fascinating, and simultaneously completely banal. Like, you know what I mean? Like it is just a fundamental fact of physics and the way the universe works as far as we understand it. And so it falls out naturally. But it is funny to think that when sometimes things happen in the night sky and they are reported as news, there's some telescope was looking at this certain point and saw a supernova. And the way it's reported is as if this supernova just happened, but it's long gone.
Right. Amazing. My son asked me a question that I couldn't actually answer, of which there aren't many, but on this occasion he got me. He said that if I was on the moon waving at you, how long would it take for you to see me wave? Do you know the answer to that?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Right. So if you know the answer to this question, then tweet it to us, and we will receive that in the future. Or, well, yes, it will be in the future.
Well into the future, yes.
That's right.
And you will be hearing us. We are the equivalent of 3 light weeks away from you, except it's audio, and we've just recorded it. Actually.
That's right. And we this is like, we're like starlight. We're the equivalent of starlight. Isn't that's a beautiful concept?
Beautiful and somewhat misleading concept. I'm slightly worried that if Sagar was that offended by how wrong you were about the robot AI, this topic is also well within his wheelhouse, and I suspect there is far more scope for our being wrong.
Well, if we're going to be wrong, let's be wrong in fine style.
Speaking of expertise, the last episode, as I just mentioned, we recorded last week and we haven't yet released. But in that episode, we spoke, as listeners will be aware, because as far as they were concerned, it came out 2 weeks ago, we spoke about security issues at some length and about password managers in general.
Right.
And it is quite a tricky topic to get right, and there's a lot of it's a minefield. So I wanted to run it by a friend of mine who is a bit of an expert in these matters. So I actually gave him a sneak preview. I sent him the MP3 of the episode to listen to, so that I could just, have a bit of a once over before we got to this episode, so the follow-up would make it on time.
I hope were we way off base?
It wasn't too bad. I was a little worried. I had said some things that I knew I was on slightly rocky ground. He said the main thing that we got across, that is the most important thing, is do not reuse passwords.
Right.
And the only reasonable way in this day and age where most people have at least 100 accounts. You probably don't realize how many accounts you have for different things on the internet. But now I've started putting all of them into a password manager. I do, because my password manager lists them with a count at the top, and it is over 100. It's about 110 at the moment, I think.
Right.
So there's a good chance, because you use a password manager as well, but the listeners who are not yet using a password manager,
right,
they may not realize.
I have 193, by the way.
193, there you go. So there is no way you're going to remember 193 distinct passwords unless you use some sort of technique for generating those passwords, which is fundamentally insecure. Like, some people use the same password everywhere, but then they intersperse the letters of the thing they're signing up to.
Right.
So if their password is password and they're signing up to Facebook, then the password for Facebook would be PFAASC and so on.
Well, thanks, Dani. Now the whole world can log in as me.
That's obviously not a very secure approach. It's one step up from reusing the same password, but it's not great. So if you're going to be secure, you really do realistically need to use some sort of password manager, and you need to have different passwords on every account. That is the most important principle, and that is the thing that we got across. So he was, by and large, happy with it. He did have a couple of comments. One thing was, we spoke briefly about, you said, if the encryption is open source and everyone knows how it works, doesn't that mean it can be cracked more easily?
Or at least reversed.
Or at least reversed more easily. He pointed to a thing called Kirchhoff's principle, which I'll link to the Wikipedia article on it in the show notes. But Kirchhoff's principle, I've probably got the pronunciation all wrong. He's a Dutch, I think, mathematician and scientist from the 19th century. And he stated this principle in 1883. So this goes back a long way. This was well understood a long time ago. And he said, a crypto system should be secure even if everything about the system, except the key, is public knowledge. So in other words, what he's saying is, it is not secure unless it has this property that even knowing the way it works, you can't reverse it.
Ah, interesting. I see.
Without the key.
I see.
So the Caesar cipher, which we spoke about on the previous episode, is an example of an insecure crypto system, because if you know the system, then even if you don't know the key, it is very easy to reverse.
Right.
Whereas modern cryptography systems and algorithms are cryptographically secure because they have this mathematical property that they are much easier to do the transformation in one direction than the other.
That's amazing. So it's actually, I see, it's irreversible cryptography, which I guess to a cryptographer would be, that's the jeans and the t-shirt of a cryptographer's wardrobe, really. But again, from a layman's point of view, that's fantastic, or it's amazing that we can generate ways to obfuscate passphrases such that you actually can't undo them. It's actually
can't undo them. Well, so it's irreversible to a first order of approximation. Anything, I think, is mathematically reversible, but it would take, with current technology, it would take like millions of years to go through the process of calculating what the reversal is. So it is essentially irreversible.
I see.
Now, people do talk about the potential that some fundamental shift in technology, which we don't understand today, and one of the things that is often cited is the concept of quantum computers. But, something that would allow us to explore many options simultaneously
Right.
might reduce the length of time it takes to decrypt something or to reverse something without the key enough that it becomes possible.
I see.
And then we're in trouble. And then we have to come up with a new system that is strong in the face of this new sort of calculating force. But at present, we are nowhere near being able to do that. So for now, we're safe.
Okay, so that answers the question that I had about knowing the recipe for a code, actually in this case, not really giving you any advantage over cracking the code.
Right.
Or at least reversing the code, I should say. But did you have anything to say about the word-based passphrases? Because, of course, word-based passphrases where you're basically just making a sentence, not only, I mean, it's just very practical. You know, it's easy to remember. It's easy to type if you're doing it on a phone.
Right.
Rather than just sort of a whole string of random letters and symbols, which is, means you have to do it sort of basically one character at a time. At least with a passphrase, you only need to glance at the word and know what you have to type, so it's much faster. Did you have anything to say about the effectiveness of those?
Right, yes, he did. So last episode, I feel like this was one of the things I wanted him to listen to and give feedback on, because I felt like I slightly poo-pooed the concept that was in that XKCD comic of word-based passphrases being fundamentally better than so-called sort of secure single word, letter, and number combinations.
I'm not sure that he said that it was actually better, but I guess it is better in the sense that it's more practical.
No, he was saying they were harder to crack as well, I think.
Okay, I thought he was saying that they were better because I actually haven't looked at that comic in a long time. I seem to recall that he wasn't saying that they were better from a security point of view. They were just more practical and also on the same order of security as, a whole bunch of garbled letters. So I was actually saying that they are better, was he?
I think so. Whether or not he is, many people do.
Okay.
And I explained the concept of entropy very briefly, and about how there are two factors. There is the length of the password, and there is the number of options for each character in the password. And the argument that this comic is making is by increasing the length, even without using all sorts of funny symbols and numbers, you can increase the entropy. Following on from that a little bit, there are a couple of points. The example password that was in that comic, which ironically I remembered better than the supposedly easier to remember password that is a phrase, is troubadour &3 with I think it's the A in troubadour is replaced with a 4. And the example phrase password is correct battery horse staple. Mm. And the idea is that those words are randomly selected, but they're easy to remember because you can have a mnemonic, you can have an image in your mind of a correct battery horse staple.
Right.
There are a couple of important points there. Firstly, the entropy of a password, be careful here, I'm not sure that entropy is necessarily the right term, but the predictability of a password, which is an English word with a couple of well-known letters replaced by numbers, like an A looks a bit like a 4, so it's clear that that is a common exchange. That is not all that much better than just the English word in the first place. Things that are operating on a dictionary basis will have those common exchanges in their dictionary.
Right.
So that's insecure to begin with. And the same goes for pass phrases. If you think of a phrase, maybe you put the lyrics to a song or some well-known quotation from Shakespeare or the Bible or something. If you type that phrase will, at the very least, follow the rules of grammar, and it will probably involve some sort of linked concepts. That also makes it easier to predict. So the important thing, regardless of whether you're using a password or a passphrase, is that the constituent parts of that key should be truly random. So if it's a password, like the default passwords that a tool like 1Password, for example, would generate for you, it's not an English word with a couple of letters changed. It is just a completely random string of letters and numbers. And similarly, for a passphrase, the idea is not that you think of an image and go, okay, correct horse battery staple. The idea is that those words were selected randomly for you, and then you, post facto, think of a mnemonic to remember those words by. If you do it the other way around, it's more predictable and thus less secure.
I see. So basically, if you have some system for selecting completely random words, but actual existing full dictionary words,
yes,
that is far better than actually trying to create that yourself and risking having some grammatical connection between them. For example, fast red car, or little green house, or things like that.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Interestingly, your two examples there, the first of which you corrected, showcase an interesting property of the English language, which has specific rules about the order in which you put adjectives.
Oh, I remember all about. Do you remember I used to be an English teacher?
Yes, of course.
A long time ago, and there was a way that I used to help students remember the order that had to come in with size, shape, type. But I've completely forgotten it now.
Most native English speakers are not even aware that this order exists. And that's why it's a particularly dangerous thing when thinking of passwords, because they will unconsciously, as you just did,
Right.
try and fit the words into that order.
Right.
And that only makes the password easier to predict. So that is a very good demonstration, Alex, of the principle.
Right.
The one other thing, just for the people who want to get really nerdy about it, is that in a sense, you can think of every word in a phrase-based password as being, from an entropic point of view, morally equivalent to every character in a character-based single-string random password.
I see.
So what that means is that the phrase-based passwords are usually shorter by that count because, for example, correct horse battery staple has only got 4 words,
Right.
whereas troubadour ampersand 3 has got however many letters it's got. But each one of those words is picked from a dictionary of some 10,000 or 20,000 of however many words there may be. And so the multiple doesn't have to be that high for the entropy to become higher with words than it is with strings of characters and numbers and symbols.
Sorry, I don't follow that. Can you explain it again?
Okay, so we spoke last time about entropy and about how there are 2 dimensions of this entropy property, right?
Right.
One is the length of the, let's call it a key, yes?
Yep.
And the other is the number of options that any constituent part of that key might have.
I see.
So a key, a password that is made only of the lowercase characters A to Z has got 26 potential options for each character in that password.
I see.
And then if the password has length 4, then you can calculate the total possible combinations of those 26 characters over those, 4 letters.
I see.
Similarly, with a phrase-based password, the password may only have 4 words in it, but instead of there being 26 options for each word, there is a whole dictionary's worth of options.
I see.
So the number of potential phrases that you might have is much higher.
I see now. Okay, so actually then, I don't believe that one password has a random word generation recipe. I know that it has pronounceable passwords, that is, passwords that are constructed out of completely random strings of letters, but they're pronounceable. So they have separators that you can choose, for example, a hyphen, and then you can either select pronounceable or unpronounceable. And so basically it'll be things like SUL, OCS, things like actual combinations of letters that you can actually say just to make it easier to either remember or to tell somebody. I don't think that one password has word-based password generation. I think
You are wrong.
I'm wrong, am I?
You're.
I'm not doing well today, am I?
I enjoyed listening to your explanation, so I thought I'd leave you to stew.
Yeah. Well, that is good because I'm sure that I know people who the whole idea of passwords. It's just such a hassle. One good thing about word-based passwords is that it's a hassle, but it's much more sort of approachable to think of something cathedral, whatever it was.
I'll give you another one. Fellow antholog Ward Shirley.
See, now that's much more approachable than, lowercase a, uppercase C, XV97, asterisk. It's much more approachable, at least thinking of it a word. So that's a great place for people to start, I guess. If
It is, so long as they generate them randomly. That is the crucial thing. If they start using song lyrics and things like that, it doesn't work. And if they use correct horse battery staple, that is also not a good idea. It's a very famous webcomic.
Right. Very interesting. Very interesting.
So, yes. And just one more thing, just to top it off. We talked about open source versus closed source and being able to inspect the code and all of that.
Yep.
Security audits, proper security audits, are very hard. They have dedicated professionals who devote their careers to doing it. And so the idea that you are going to be able to scan over the code of an open source project and decide if it's secure is not very tenable.
I see.
But you can hopefully rely to some extent on the security, and particularly people who are starting out in a career doing security auditing may decide to audit an open source project as a sort of, in order to show off their knowledge and their ability as a way into the industry. So there are valid audits of both closed source and open source systems. The commercial systems will tend to publish a white paper describing how their system works and the entire system, not just the encryption algorithm. The encryption algorithm is usually the easiest part to get right because it's been proven mathematically. So you just have to do what they say and it will work. But the whole system from start to finish, including the way that you actually input the password and where that gets saved, and does that get put into some random buffer in memory that some other application could read, or does it get securely encrypted and stowed away as quickly as possible, and all that sort of thing. That's more where the problems happen. And so the big password managers will publish security white papers describing how their system works so that you can read those and convince yourself that you trust them and that you think they are, going to be able to store your password securely. So I will put a link to some of those in the show notes. They make for quite interesting reading, although they are also long and very detail oriented. So it's up to you whether you read it or not. But I thought it was very interesting.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Now, I have some shocking news.
Go on.
And this is actually something that actually when it happens to you, it is rather shocking. I don't know if it's happened to you before, but a week ago, or 4 weeks ago, depending on your point of view, my watch strap broke.
Oh, no.
Now, this was quite a shocking thing to happen, actually. So I was luckily, very luckily, I was sitting down at the time, and I was talking, and I must have lifted my hand up, and it might have caught on something. I'm not exactly sure what, but suddenly I felt it come loose, and I noticed it and caught it with my other hand. And because I was sitting down, it was an easy matter, but because my arms were, at the right angle right there, basically on my lap, so it was fine. But had I been standing up, that watch piece would have gone straight down to the ground, and that it wouldn't have been a good day. But my watch strap broke. Now, this is actually the first time that I've actually had a watch strap completely fail, and the point at which it failed is actually quite interesting. We're going to have a fun time trying to describe this using just words, but you have, if you think the way that a watch strap is constructed, it's basically a strip of leather, and it has a flap that goes around what's called the spring bar. That's the bar that holds a strap onto the watch. The piece of metal that goes between the two lugs that are poking out on the end of the watch. It wraps around there and is usually glued on back to the strap itself to make a loop, basically.
Oh, I see. Oh, is that usually glued on? I thought it was usually stitched.
Oh, on some straps it is glued on. On some straps it is stitched on.
Okay.
Mine happens to be glued on. And I've had this watch. I'll talk about the watch in a moment, but I've had this watch for almost 5 years. Mm-hmm. And this strap has been fantastic. It's a very nice leather, calfskin, light brown strap, extremely comfortable and wonderfully, especially useful for Northeast Asia here. It doesn't smell when you get sweaty on it, which is something that I've had an issue with straps that I bought in Japan. They, for whatever reason, maybe it's just the kind of straps that I've chosen previously, for whatever reason, they start to smell pretty funky when it gets really hot. But this one never did, and it was amazing. It's extremely comfortable and has all the wonderful things about a leather strap that you'd expect. It's kind of formed after a while. It's basically the shape of your wrist.
Right.
It's nicely formed to the shape of your wrist, and it's extremely comfortable. It's very light, and it looks nice. And being leather, the older that it gets, the nicer it looks. So anyway, it broke, and I saved the watch, which is what I was most relieved about because I love this watch. Did I tell you how long it took for me to actually choose this watch?
You did, but let's tell everyone else.
The man who reads only one book took 5 years to choose the watch that he has at the moment. The thing is that watches, they mean many things. I mean, they're a practical thing to have on your wrist to tell the time, of course. These days, I think the meaning of a watch is changing a little because so many people, your mobile phone has become your sort of personal information communication assistant throughout the day.
Right.
And the idea of just sort of flipping out your phone and checking something on there, you're doing it many times during the day anyway. So most people who don't have a watch say, well, I don't need a watch because I just check the time on my phone. So now the actual meaning of a wristwatch is sort of shifting slightly and in a good direction, I think, because now if you have a wristwatch, it's probably because you like them.
Right. It is almost a statement at this point because they are kind of an anachronism.
Right. And the nice thing is that, it could be because you like them, or it could be because it was a gift, or it could be because it has some special significance. For example, you bought this as sort of a memento, as a certain point of time in your life to remind yourself of some achievement or some change of lifestyle or something.
Right.
Many people often buy watches or gift watches for those purposes, which I think is wonderful. This watch, which is it's by a small German company called De Facto, that's DEFAKTO.
Link in the show notes.
Yes, has a special meaning for me because I was after something very minimal. I like designs that are very, very minimal and very timeless in that regard, that you just don't get tired looking at it because it's so refined in its aesthetic appeal. It contains nothing superfluous. This one I chose after, I think I narrowed it down after 5 years to 2. I've always liked the idea of a diver's watch, which is it's a kind of watch made famous by Rolex, which has a bezel around the outside, which is a rotating disc that contains numbers that you can use as a timer. So you basically rotate it and you can set the numbers up to align with the minute hand, and that's an easy way to sort of set a minute timer. And I always used to find on the old Seiko diver's watch that I used to have, I always used to find that really useful. But it's a funny thing, I guess, as you... I think, well, yes, that it's a diver's watch, but I'm not a diver. I guess, really, if you want to,
that applies to a lot of things in watches, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the Omega's got the first watch in space. Speaking of space earlier and the moon, if I was to wave at you from the moon wearing a watch, it would probably be an Omega Speedmaster Professional.
Right.
But I'm probably not going to the moon.
Yeah, it's probably, I'm not a diver, therefore I should not wear a diver's watch, is probably probably one of the lesser quality arguments I've ever made in my life. But anyway, I narrowed it down to a brand called Archimede, which is a German watch brand. They make cases. It's made in a factory called the Ickler factory in Pforzheim in Germany, and they make some really wonderful German-style pilot's watches. Which, if you've seen them before, you'll know they are the quintessential minimal design. And they're extremely legible. The numbers are bold, bright numbers. Do they even have numbers? I have to check now.
I think they do.
They do, yes. Big kind of sword-shaped hands with lots of lume, which is the name for the chemical that glows in the dark. Anyway, it was that. Or, interestingly, I found that Archimede, the Ickler factory, they have a number of brands. Archimede is run by Mr. Ickler. And Mr. Ickler's son runs this brand called De Facto, which is like the small, much more modern, more sort of design-oriented watch brand. And they actually make their cases in the same factory with the Archimedes in the same Ickler factory. and they get the movements from Switzerland.
Right.
And they're all mechanical movements, which, again, I just love the idea, the idea of a mechanical movement. It's like there's the history of it, which of course is wonderful. For those of you who are not aware, a mechanical movement is basically a movement that doesn't require a battery. So it will either be powered by you winding it every day, or it will be powered by a rotating disc on the inside that actually winds itself as you move your arm throughout the day, which is what mine is. They call that an automatic movement, and it has a Swiss movement, which is of this automatic type on the inside. I just like the idea that it sort of lives on you. If you put the watch down, it sort of goes to sleep. It just stops.
Right.
And when you lift it up and you wind it a few times and you keep it on your arm every day, it keeps going. And it keeps going and going and going and going, and you never have to do anything about it. And I think it's as a sort of if you're going to wear a watch as like a companion through your life to remind you of something, or just as something to, for a little brief moment of happiness looking down at your wrist every day, the idea that the watch has some connection with you. It doesn't just sit there telling the time by itself. It actually needs you to tell the time, not only to read the time off it, of course, but also to power it by moving your arm. I just find that an extremely beautiful concept. All of that to say that my de facto Accord, which is this fantastic design by Raphael de facto, who's the CEO, and because de facto is actually a one-man shop. It's basically the son and his dad. Mr. Ickler makes all the cases in Pforzheim, and he puts in the Swiss movements.
Is his name not Ickler as well?
It is. He's Raphael Ickler.
Oh, right. You said Raphael de facto.
Did I?
Never mind. Raphael of de facto.
Yes, thank you. Anyway, all that to say that this watch is extremely precious. And the strap broke. And it's been an extremely brutal, the humidity at the moment. We're right on the tail end of the monsoon season in Japan, so the humidity is just... is incredible at the moment. So that must have finally done the glue in on the leather strap.
Right.
And it just broke. So I went hunting for a new watch strap. Actually, before I go into the watch strap itself, do you want to just tell me a little about the watch that you have on your wrist?
Okay. Well, all right. So yes, it was you who turned me on to watches and specifically mechanical watches in the first place. I did used to wear a watch when I was around 18. And I lost that watch. And I didn't consciously elect not to wear watches anymore because we've got a mobile phone or anything like that. But I never saw another watch that I liked as much as this one I'd lost. So I figured there was no point in downgrading. So I just never got around to buying one. And then when you turned me on to watches, I guess I didn't spend 5 years, but I did spend a good 3 or 4 months looking at different styles of watches and different brands. And that is part of the fun when you first get into watches, is learning your own taste.
Right. And
getting a feel for what it is that you like. Because the watches that I was looking at when I first started looking, I look back at now and I just think there's no way I would wear that. That is awful. Whereas the watch that I eventually ended up buying, I look down at every day, and I'm constantly surprised and delighted by how nice it continues to look, and how something that really isn't changing. It's the same thing. It's mechanical, so it's not like I can make it, change the colors of the hands or anything like that. But it still surprises me. Occasionally, I catch it in a different light and just remember. It's nice. Anyway, that watch is the Stover Marine Original, which is another German branded watch, and also has quite a stark design, if not minimalist, based on the military pocket watches in Germany during the Second World War, which is a little bit probably best not thought about, but it is a manually wound watch, so it is different from yours, which is automatic. Mine, I actually have to wind myself every day before I put it on. It takes about 10 to 13 winds in order to power it for the whole day.
Do you mind doing that?
Not at all, no. And I mean, I barely notice it, to be honest. People do talk about it being a nice routine and making them feel kind of connected to the watch and giving them a sort of moment to stop and think during their day. I'm not sure that I get that much out of it.
Right.
I typically pick it up as I'm sort of wandering around and getting ready for the day, and just wind it up as I'm walking from where the watch belongs in the bedroom to where the curtains are in the living room, and then I open the curtains and carry on, sort of thing.
Right.
It's not that big a part of the morning, but it's just a thing that I do almost without thinking now.
Right.
I do like, it's got an open or a glass casing on the back, so you can see the movement inside,
Right.
which yours does as well.
Yes.
And it is, with the manually wound watches, those are particularly nice because they don't have the spinning discs, so the movement is completely visible, uncovered.
Right.
And so they tend to decorate these movements so that they look extra nice. So that's a nice thing. The hands are blued steel, which is this special heating that they apply to the hands after they make them, which means that they glow in this very bright, almost electric blue when you catch them in the light, but they just look black when they're not in the light. So there is a little bit of variety there, that depending on the angle at which you catch it and the light in which you're looking at it, it changes. And it's a very beautiful watch. I love the typeface that the digits are written in. I like the small seconds hand at the bottom. I like the simplicity of it. So I'm very happy with it as well. And it came with 2 straps in my case. So if this strap breaks, then I will have a backup. But I'll also be very sad because the strap that it came with that I'm wearing right now is a very nice one.
Yeah, your watch is stunning. And the wonderful thing about your watch is that it suits you so perfectly. If you had to think of Dani and you had to think of a watch, I mean, these two things just go together so naturally. My watch, I didn't describe the face. It's a little hard to describe, really. It's a black face. There's no numbers. There's no type on it except for the logo de facto, which is very small. And basically the geometric relationship between the thickness of the lines, the length of the lines on my watch is what immediately drew me to it. The interesting feature on it, it's only got one interesting feature. Basically, it's as kind of minimal as you could possibly imagine for a watch. You know, you've got hour hands. You've got I guess you could go much more minimal if you went something like Rado. You know, the Rado brand that has nothing on the face except for the hands. But in this particular case, you've got hour hands, hour indicators. You've got minute indicators. The hour indicators are the same thickness as the hands themselves, and the only feature of it really is the hour hand is actually, it's like the outline of the minute hand at half the length. So if you imagine the minute hand being this rectangular block, if you then drew an outline around that rectangular block in the same thickness of line as the minute indicators, and then hollowed out the middle, then half the length, that's the hour hand. And it's obviously very hard to describe with words, but if you look at the picture of it, you'll see what I mean.
That was a good description, but we'll put links in the show notes for both of these watches.
Yeah. Anyway, I love it. The name is Accord, which in German means chord, as in like harmony and piano chord, you know, like a C-E-G chord.
Very, very appropriate for you.
Yeah, it's very appropriate. And actually that the history, I have gotten to know the CEO of De Facto, Raphael Ickler, fairly well actually, because I like I'm sure every customer does, I actually wrote a very impassioned email to him after I received my watch to tell him about how much I loved it.
Right. The natural thing to do.
Yeah, not only actually how much I loved it, but why I loved it. You know, why I thought that his design was fantastic. And I just went through and described basically what I did just now, where I picked up on all of the... I noticed that the length of the hour hand is exactly the same length as the de facto logo, so that the logo will actually fit into the hour hand if you could remove it and slot it in there. All the lines are of consistent weight. The length of the lines is perfect so that it looks completely balanced, but they're all kind of connected with each other in a sort of a geometric pattern. And I spelled all of that out for him. Of course, I don't know. I was just very happy with it. And wonderfully, being a one-person company, you know, he just wrote back and said, "Oh, thanks very much for your feedback. I'm glad you're enjoying the watch. You seem very observant of these smaller details that I put in. What is it that you do?" And then I talked to him a bit about, you know, what my previous work that I've done in graphic design, industrial design, and stuff like that. And we just got talking, and that also the fact that I know the person who made my watch. It makes it even more, that feeling of attachment to this thing that I have on my wrist makes it even more potent, that feeling that, I just love this watch, and I love Raphael's whole idea for his company. All of his designs just kind of hit me in the bullseye of my heart. It's like, bang, right there. Yes, I want that too. Anyway, so the reason I brought all this up, of course, is the strap. So I'll just move on and talk about the strap that I've chosen, because it's an interesting, if you are interested in watches, you may be interested to hear about, I should say, if you're not interested in watches, but this conversation is maybe turning you around a little.
If you're not interested in watches, I'm very sorry. You've been talking about them for half an hour now.
Yeah, you probably haven't listened this far if you're not interested in watches. So anyway, the strap that I've chosen is called a NATO strap. And a NATO strap is, I've had them before. I've had a very cheap one before on my other Seiko diver. A NATO strap is basically a strip of nylon. And you may be thinking, well, why would you put an expensive watch onto a strip of nylon? The history is actually interesting. The NATO strap was one of the very early strap designs. It's actually a military-influenced strap design. Like a lot of the history of the watch is connected with the military. And of course, leaving aside, the greater meaning of what the military is all about, if we just put that aside for the moment, the wristwatch in itself. Do you actually know the etymology of the word watch?
No, I don't believe I do.
It's very interesting. There's two accounts, and both of them are not really military, but I guess servicemen related. The first account of the history of the word watch is that it's a short form of the word watchman, and in the early times, the person who'd be responsible for telling the time would be the tower watchman.
Ah, yeah. Like that whole image of ringing the bell and going, it's 4:00 and all is well and all that.
Exactly. And that's the man of the watch.
Right.
The man of the watch. The second account is a very similar thing, is sailors. Also, the only people who would use a watch on the boat would be sailors who are on the watch.
Right.
You see, again, on the watch. So that's where the history of the word watch comes from. And the wristwatch was worn by women as far back as the 17th century. But up until very close to up until the 20th century, men traditionally carried pocket watches.
Right.
Which is like everybody knows what a pocket watch is, I hope, but it's basically like a wristwatch without a band that has a chain, and it's got a little lid that you flip open to see the time, and you keep it in your pocket. The earliest incarnations of the wristwatch for men was actually in the military. Military men started to wear watches in the late 19th century, essentially because they needed to tell the time, but they needed both of their hands free. There was no capability to sort of reach down into your pocket and pull out a pocket watch when you needed both hands to be doing what you do as a military man. Anyway, the NATO strap then actually has nothing to do with NATO, the military political organization, but actually it's to do with the reference number, which is, I think the actual NATO strap is the G1018 or something, which is a form that you'd have to fill in the English military if you wanted to acquire one of these nylon straps.
Right.
I've come this far after 37 minutes of blabbering on about this without actually telling you what a NATO strap is. So basically it's a nylon strap, and the way that it's different is that it's actually made of one piece. So unlike a regular strap, which will be two pieces for both ends of the watch, this is a strap that's exactly the length of in between the lugs. Those are the bits that stick out of the watch, and it weaves down through one lug underneath the bottom of the watch, and then back up over the other side. So it's sort of like the watch is actually locked on top of it by these two lugs with the strap going underneath, if that makes sense.
Right.
The NATO strap actually has an additional strip of nylon that goes underneath that. So you've got the strap that goes through the lugs, out there through the spring bars and out the other side. Then underneath that, you've got one more piece of strap that's held by a retainer on the other side. And the point of that is basically so that the watch doesn't slide backwards and forwards, because obviously if it's strapped underneath like that, it could slide along up and down along the top.
Right.
But the point of this retainer is that it stops it from sliding any further than a certain point. And that's it. And you may have seen NATO straps if you watch, if you are familiar with James Bond. He had several very famous NATO straps. One distinctive feature of them is that often they'll be extremely long, and that is to actually allow for wearing on top of like a wetsuit or on top of some kind of uniform or something, again, for military purposes. So that's why they have this extra bit of length at the bottom. And what people do when you wear it on your wrist is that you actually tuck that excess piece of length back inside itself. And so they look a little bit more bulky than you might think for just a thin strip of nylon. So I chose this because after that harrowing experience having my watch fall off my wrist, one good thing about the NATO strap, there are a few good things about them, but one good thing is that because the watch is actually connected by both sides with the strap going underneath the watch itself, it means that should a spring bar, that's the metal pole that holds the strap on, should one of those actually fail and pop off, for example, if you happen to catch your watch on something and you put a massive amount of stress on one of the spring bars and it breaks, the watch is still attached. It's attached by the other side, which is still hanging onto the strap itself. So it's a very secure design. It's very simple. It's very, very light, relatively affordable. You can get very, very cheap NATO straps. The one that I had before was extremely cheap, but I found that the edges were somewhat rough, which meant that when I was sort of had my wrist at a right angle, sometimes I would actually feel the strap cutting into my skin a bit, which is not very comfortable. So the very cheap ones will have that. Also, being nylon, obviously, it frays eventually. But even the more expensive NATO straps, which is what I've got this time around, which actually came... An expensive NATO strap will run you back about $30 US. The one that I got was about $20 US. And they have much higher grade nylon, much finer weave, so that the edges are less rough. Also, they have parts of it are actually melted, so that to create like a bond with the nylon so that it doesn't fray so easily.
Right.
And the particular one that I got is from a company called Toxic NATO, which is a US one-person operation. And he also has upgraded the hardware. So the hardware actually looks very nice on his as well. It's all brushed steel, which suits the case of my de facto very nicely. And there you have it. So that is my exciting news.
Very nice. So hopefully you'll be able to avoid this disaster again, or at least if the strap breaks, your watch will be safe.
That's right. Yes. Anyway, so if you are considering getting a watch, please do, because they are great. Make it a nice one. Why not? Make an occasion, something nice to wear on your wrist and something nice to remember this point in your life.
Take the time. Actually, don't worry about rushing into buying a watch. Just spend some time. We'll put links in the show notes to Worn and Wound, which is a great sort of blog and website with reviews of reasonably affordable watches.
Yeah.
And then to Hodinkee, which is another website devoted to the completely high-end, the outrageous end of the scale.
Right.
Spending a bit of time on both of those websites is both dangerous and very interesting, because you really do get a chance to get a feel for what it is that you like.
Yeah.
And I think the best approach is not to think, oh, I'm going to buy a watch. I'm going to buy a watch like next week. I wonder which one I'll buy. But it's just to spend a bit of time just browsing these websites and get a feel for what it is you like. And you might not buy it this month. You might not buy it this year. You might take 5 years like Alex did. But you can enjoy that process in itself.
Yeah, and it's fun. And as you mentioned there, I was going to mention Worn and Wound. Worn and Wound is an excellent site because they do reviews, very nicely done reviews on the whole spectrum. You know, they have some very, very affordable watches there too. If you think that like a cheap Casio G-Shock is below regard in this world, no, it's not actually. You know, the Casio G-Shock carries with it a legacy of its own. But Worn and Wound is great because they'll introduce you to the bottom end and also on occasion to the top end. Whereas Hodinkee is really for, you know, the vintage collectors and for the really exquisite high end. And Hodinkee is fantastic as well because, yeah, obviously the Rolexes and the Philippe Pateks and the Panerais and all of those, they are amazing. And, you know, normal people like me will never, ever own something like that. But, you know, it's like Top Gear, you know, that great British car show where they review supercars that nobody can ever afford. I think even if the idea of actually owning or using, wearing or driving something like that is completely out of the question, as a sort of a testament to their design and to the amount of basically to the quality and to the just the pride that has gone into the manufacture of these fine pieces, whether it be a supercar or a super watch. Hodinkee is great for getting an appreciation of that as well. So,
very good.
There you have it. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, I was very, very privileged to spend 2 years in an architectural fittings manufacturer in South Osaka. So basically they make things like handrails and staircases and exterior fittings, basically the sort of the accessories for architects when they're finishing off their designs. Let's just throw in a staircase, or let's put in this handrail here, or like this kind of this shelving system here, or things like that. The company that I worked for was called Morita Aluminium Industry, or Aluminum Industry, as it actually was, and it was an absolute privilege to work there for 2 years. I was lucky to be hired on there as a graphic designer. But being that there were only 2 people in the design department, myself and the lead designer, I got heavily involved in the industrial design aspect of what the company does as well. And it's a small company, 40 people or so. The factory is right there. The design department consists of 2, 3. Actually, now it's a little larger now, but at the time it was basically just me and the lead designer. And wow. Talk about being thrown in the deep end of industrial design. It was go from day one. Making prototypes, understanding form, understanding ergonomics, understanding people's emotions, people's feelings, understanding branding, understanding appearance, understanding materials, manufacture. All of these things just all came at once.
How did the relationship between graphic design and industrial design go? Like, was graphic design a big part of what you did up front as sort of planning what the actual physical object you were talking about would look like? Or was it more of you did, the industrial design, the design of the physical product first, and then afterwards you're like, okay, now we've got to figure out how to brand, package, and advertise this?
Sure. Graphic design is, in my opinion, the root of it all. Graphic design is basically, it's flat surface design, usually.
Right.
And the core aspects of graphic design are basic things like colors, balance, layout, and communication. How is it that we can convey this message the most efficiently with the least amount of execution is basically what graphic design is all about, at least in my view. So an effective graphic design isn't all just about something that just looks really nice. That is a part of it, but it's also about effectively communicating something in a way that is easily accessible by the viewer. So when you think about it, when you put it that way, that basically is the core of industrial design as well.
Right.
Industrial design, it's probably a bit abstract and a bit pretentious to call it communication, but in a sense it kind of is, because you have a concept or you have an idea, and the actual form that this object takes is communicating that idea. And how effectively you can do that and how efficiently you can do that, that's where the actual tangible sort of skills can't be tangible, really, can they? But the actual measurable skills come into industrial design. That means manufacture, the manufacture process, selection of materials. How can we manufacture this to keep the cost as low as possible, keep the production as efficient as possible, using interesting materials, and also make it ecologically respectful and safe. All of these aspects come into play when you talk about industrial design. So graphic design is a core element of all of that, because the process basically works like this. My lead designer would always say that, he'd always say, this is a very sort of Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi kind of thing, but he would always say that, Alex, graphic design is basically like sushi. You can't make sushi without good fish, which is a kind of a funny, ironic statement, because of course you can't, because sushi is just fish. But his point there is that, the concept of a design, whether it be graphic design or industrial design, is about 80% of it, the actual concept.
Right.
And the actual execution of it, which is what you see or what you touch and use in the case of industrial design, is actually 20% of that. And that actually, I learned that in a very, very rewarding way during my time there. I was actually privileged to take part in a designers seminar where we had 40 young designers from around the Kansai area get together for this 5-week seminar. And part of that involved creating our own industrial designs for one of the sponsoring companies of this seminar.
Right.
And the company that I chose was actually a company that specialized in rotational molding. Rotational molding is where you have, it's a kind of plastic molding where you have a huge drum that's shaped like the part that you want to make. You fill it with plastic pellets and you heat it up and then you spin it around.
Right.
And the plastic pellets, by centrifugal force, they fly to the outside of this mold. And then when you take the mold off, you have your large plastic shape.
Right.
And rotational molding is used for very large objects, usually made of things like, if you go to a children's playground, like, for example, the slippery dip is usually made of some kind of a fiberglass or ABS or some kind of plastic like that. You may wonder, how do they actually make something so large? That's generally done like this. You have this large metal case and they fill it with the pellets and they just spin it around and that forms that shape when you take it off.
All right, that's interesting.
So this was the company that I'd chosen to do my design for. And what was great was that, what I'd learned by that stage, this was in my second year, what I'd learned by that stage is when you go to create industrial design, to create a product, you don't just sit down and start sketching. You don't just sort of sit down and start drawing things of what you think it would look like. Let's make it look cool and look like this. And I guess that's one approach. But what I'd learned at that stage from my lead designer was that it's a better approach to think more about the concept of what it is that you're trying to do and let the execution be the final part of it.
Right.
So I thought as an experiment, I would try. This part of the seminar was actually a competition. So all 40 of us had to design products, and a bunch of famous notable designers in Kansai would get together with the manufacturers and discuss which were the winning, and they would choose 10 winning designs out of the 40. And to cut to the chase, I was really fortunate to actually win a spot in that 10.
Oh, well done.
Yeah, actually, I did it as an experimentation of a pure execution of my lead designer's approach. So what I did was I actually spent 4 weeks basically just working in sort of mind maps and writing and a lot of thought and thinking with no sketching and nothing visual at all. So I was thinking about the manufacturing process. I was thinking about the purpose of the design. I was actually designing an outdoor rubbish bin, a nice looking outdoor rubbish bin that could be made with rotational molding.
Okay, so even right in the initial spec you described, nice looking is first and foremost.
Well, no. I mean, I guess...
And yet...
Nice looking... Well, okay. I mean, that is assuming that... I put nice looking in there because the current designs for outdoor rubbish bins aren't very attractive.
Right. No, I'm just saying it's quite interesting that even this approach of thinking ahead, thinking of all the factors and the concept and the manufacture and all that ahead, and only coming to the actual physical design towards the end, even applies when the look of the thing is a key and important part of what you're trying to do. In
this specific case, yes, because it's a rubbish bin. And in Japan, there's often like a cultural stigma associated with rubbish, that it's it's very dirty and it's something that it has a very negative kind of connotation associated with it. So for something to actually look appealing is actually an important criteria for this in this situation. So all of this stuff basically, and then of course the manufacturer, the materials, the process, how long it would take, whether it would be efficient and therefore cheap to manufacture, key features of it that could be used to market it, all of these kinds of things. I spent 4 weeks thinking about it, and you make a lot of documentation, a lot of diagrams of information, just sorting out like a sort of a hierarchy of information of what order I wanted to be communicating these things in the design. And the amazing thing is that actually when I sat down at the end of all of that in the 5th week to actually design what it would visually look like, it took about 20 minutes.
Right.
And the reason for that was because it wasn't really so much a creative exercise anymore at that stage. Like all of the thinking, all of the concept had been put into it, that when it came down to work out what it should look like, it basically, everything that I had worked up to that point dictated how it should look.
Right.
Because in order to achieve this kind of, for example, this kind of efficient manufacture and these materials and this color and all that, it has to look like this. And the result of all of that was the design was very, very simple, kind of clever in its the way that it was functional. I won't bother going into that, but anyway, all of that, and then I was very, very lucky to receive a spot in that top 10 of the. It wasn't a ranked top 10, but basically the top 10 designs were then we had to make presentations for the whole group and like the notable designers in the area in front of everybody about our designs, which is great fun. So that was one of the main things that I learnt, is that and it can be carried across to many other facets of design as well. That basically the concept is often much more important than the execution. And if you have a solid concept, the execution will kind of dictate itself.
Right. Do you find, you say that when the time came to decide how it looked and to draw it, it wasn't a very creative process by that point because all the decisions had been made.
Right.
Did you find that takes some of the fun out of it?
Good question. Probably yes. However, as a workflow, there are going to be things like if you're doing industrial design for a living, you're going to be designing things that are basically not very fun to think about from a visual point of view.
Right.
Sometimes.
Was the upfront planning fun? Did that fun, did it disappear or did it just move to a different stage of the process, I guess?
It moved. The planning aspect of it and sort of consciously forcing myself not to visualize what I'm working on. That planning aspect of it was a huge amount of fun. It's kind of like puzzle solving. Well, if I do this, then that's going to be a problem. So how do I solve that? It was a huge amount of fun. It's a different kind of fun than just sort of sitting down with a piece of paper and sketching some wild spaceship or something. It's a different kind of creativity and a different kind of fun, really. But as I said, if I was doing that every single day for a load of different projects at the same time, the actual process of sitting down and sketching something and making it look cool, so to speak, that is, it gets pretty dry when you're doing things like, a handrail over and over again.
Right.
Or like, a shelf. There's only so much fun that you can have visually with a shelf.
Right.
Although, of course, there may be many industrial designers who might argue with that. But I think having the fun shift onto this much more cerebral, intellectual pursuit of an efficient, effective communication of this concept, having a shift into that area, for me, I never expected that itself would be fun.
Right.
I also, when I first started the company, it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna draw lots of cool stuff, and I'm gonna 3D render lots of cool stuff.
Right. But
actually, after a little while doing it, I realized, well, hardly any of that cool stuff is actually manufacturable or practical or affordable or even, at the end of the day, you end up sort of refining something that, yes, it may kind of look nice, but it ends up becoming just sort of this sort of odd piece of visual decoration, which is completely infeasible from an industrial design, manufacture, marketing, all of that ergonomics point of view. Now, all of that said, there are many wonderful designers who take a completely different approach and go the other way. There'll be many designers who actually start off with a visual design as their concept,
right,
and then work backwards from there and figure out how to make this affordable, ecological, and all of that based on this visual design, and then basically sort of make sacrifices to the visual design as needed by the circumstances. But
right,
one thing I learned from those 2 years is that concept concept before execution, and that aspect itself can be applied to graphic design easily. If you're thinking about, I need to do a logo for a company, for example, right?
Right.
If that was the situation, rather than just taking the letters of the logo and making it look cool, if you actually spend, the greater part of the time sitting there thinking about, well, what does this company communicate? What does this company mean? How is it viewed in the eyes of the consumers? How does it want to be viewed in the eyes of its consumers? All of those aspects of the concept, and refine that, then you tend to find that in the case of a logo, that the logo just falls into place because you have all of the criteria laid out in front of you. And it's just a matter of finding it's like a Venn diagram. It's just a matter of finding that overlap.
Right.
There it is. That's the visual execution right there, and it's very simple. So
Right.
yeah, that's definitely something to learn. I guess it can also go into game design as well, which is a bit more relevant to what I do at the moment, in that the concept of the game, even if the game was executed extremely poorly, that is, that was slightly buggy and the art isn't great and the sound is awful, and if the game itself has a strong enough concept, it can carry itself through. And a great testimony to that, of course, is many of the great ASCII games, such as Rogue and NetHack and Dwarf Fortress and all of those. Those are incredibly fun and fantastically designed, but they're just basically straight ASCII text. There is no execution, more or less.
Although there's a difference between being badly made and having bugs and bad graphics and that, and just being made on a limited medium, I think.
True. Yeah, that's true. That's a topic for another discussion, is where limits come into all this, because that also is a very interesting discussion as well, which we won't do today. But yeah, I think that the main thing that I took away from those 2 years was that if your concept is strong enough, your execution, to a certain degree, you only need to sort of tick off the minimal requirements of the execution. And if your concept is strong enough, it will carry itself through extremely strongly anyway.
Right.
Which is it's a really nice idea, and I think for tying it back into watch design as well, it's the same thing with the idea of why I like these sort of very minimal watch designs. I don't need to have superlative oyster motion, perpetual calendar, 200 meter, all that kind of stuff written on my watch, because I know that's why I bought it.
Right.
If you want to make a watch that is a good diver's watch, think about all the things that need to be made to make it a good diver's watch, rather than just writing "this is a good diver's watch" on the face. Yeah, that's only my subjective opinion of certain watch designs. But anyway, yeah. So it was a wonderful 2 years, and I learned a great deal about design in general. And also one thing that just to end it was a nice concept, is just that really design in itself. It carries across all of the disciplines. The core, the overall concept, I'm using that word too much. The overall objective of what you're doing and the workflow of it tends to be very similar, whether you're doing, textile design, or you're doing fashion design, or you're doing architecture, or industrial design, or graphic design, or game design, or web design, or any of the disciplines of design that we have now.
Right.
That idea of concept and the idea of efficient execution and all of that is it tends to carry through all of it. So that was really, really great to learn that firsthand.
Yeah, it was actually, that was one of the things I always quite enjoyed about working with you, is that you had this, many of us come from a very pure games background and we haven't really done anything else, whereas you had this experience which is not a million miles away and still clearly very relevant, but it was just a little bit different. And I think that, especially with the industrial design, the way you make things concrete, including something like the concept, which feels like something that almost should be airy-fairy. But with your approach, you're saying, well, no, we will pin down exactly what this concept is, and then we will have an axis around which all the decisions from this point can be made. Because, you'll often come to a decision point when you're making a game or anything else where you need to decide what to do. You've got a whole team of people, all of whom have conflicting opinions most of the time, and you need a basis on which to make one decision or the other. And having a very strong concept can help guide you during those times.
Yeah, I personally find it kind of annoying when it just basically becomes a bunch of people giggling about what would be, air quotes, awesome. Because when it comes to game design, we can do anything. Yes, we can actually do anything. You can make the game absolutely anything at all. And the scope of what you could do with it is limitless, really, just basically limited by your hardware and the amount of time you have to execute it.
Right.
So, when it comes to a bunch of people just sitting around the table giggling at each other about what would be awesome, that just really irritates me. And I think, yes, it's great to have fun. Obviously, you need to have fun with creating games, because games are about entertainment. But yeah, I just personally like the idea of, yes, that indeed may be awesome, but let's save that idea for another game because it doesn't fit in with our actual direction that we're working with here, and that's this.
Right.
And I guess if you obviously you come to situations where people's interpretation of that concept is gonna waver. Arguably, the concept probably isn't strong enough if people are interpreting it radically differently from you. If people have a completely different interpretation of the concept, then probably the concept either isn't refined or isn't expressed accurately enough. But I think that the options are just limitless. So therefore, again, this is coming back into the large discussion of limits that I just said that we won't do today. But anyway, you need to often have something to sort of channel. Otherwise, you're going to have way too many concepts packed into this thing. It'll just become the sort of confused mishmash of or so-called design by committee, really, which is basically what that is.
Right. I mean, I don't really recognize the thing you're talking about of people sitting around giggling saying this will be awesome. But I definitely have experience of people saying we need this feature. You can't not have this feature. If you can't put this feature on the back of the box, then it's a write-off for every single feature. And then suddenly you've got just this overwhelming number of disjointed features that don't fit together. And I do think that the best games that I have played are the ones which are very focused in the thing that they're trying to do and do that thing very well and don't try and do too much else.
Yeah, I guess in my view, when you have that situation where everybody has their features that they're passionate about and that they want to see included, there are basically two solutions to that situation that I can think of. Number one is what we've been talking about, where you have a core concept that dictates whether or not certain features are relevant or actually effective in communicating that core concept.
Right.
So that will be an automatic yes or a no right there. No, it doesn't help in communicating what we're trying to do with this game. The other solution to that situation is a hierarchy, where you have basically one person who makes that decision that no, that's not what I want in the game. That's not part of my vision. I guess it's kind of the same thing, whether you take that person's vision and put it into a sentence and actually have that guide the decisions, or whether you actually have that person with their vision in their head and then they say yes or no. You have that person decide, and make those decisions.
Right. I mean, that person needs to be equally committed to a focused, clear, well thought out game.
Yeah, true.
Because it's in many situations that person is the producer or the director of the game, and they often don't. Right? This isn't like a blanket criticism. They do a very good job and they have a difficult job, but you can't always rely on the person at the top to know what's best for the particular game.
Right.
Like there are some games which are made by a person with a vision, and there are other games which was sort of an idea that is handed to a person that then has to direct it, and then they try and lead it, but it wasn't even their idea to begin with. There are a lot of games that you do for publishers that are like spec work, that you haven't come up with the concept yourself, and even in those cases, I think this idea of a unifying concept is very important to pin down early on, because you do run into this sort of trouble.
Yeah. And I think often you'll come across situations where that core concept needs to be slightly modified.
Right. It's not immovable.
Yeah.
It's not that anything we decide now is written in stone, and so we better get it right because there's no changing it. It's not like that, but you need a basis on which to make decisions.
Right. So, yeah, that was my 2 years in industrial design. Very, very important part of my life, I guess, those 2 years.
Obviously had a deep impact, although perhaps not on this particular episode of the podcast where we have rambled on a number of subjects with no real link between them at all.
Yes.